Hey guys, welcome back to Econ Class. Today we're going to be talking about the gains and losses from trade, and we're going to be looking at it through the supply and demand curve. This is the last part of Unit 2 right here, and not necessarily the most difficult, but definitely the most complex model that we're going to be looking at for this unit, possibly the entire class. But if you enjoyed looking at the models so far, this one is really going to do it for you. Now, big objectives for today: identify and calculate the cost and benefits of an open economy, or one with trade. Illustrate the impact of trade policies on consumer, producer, and total surplus, and then identify and calculate the deadweight loss from tariffs. And then finally, we're going to differentiate between the impact of a tariff and a quota. Before we start looking at the models, we've got a few different vocab and ideas that we got to get through. So the first word is autarky. All right, now what this is a closed economy, a self-sufficient economy. Everything produced is done within the country itself, and they trade amongst themselves. They don't engage in any international trade. So there will be no imports or exports in an autarky. Now, on the other hand, we have open economies. These allow for trade with foreign entities. All right. When we're looking at an open economy, price is going to be influenced by the entire world or everybody engaged in the trade. You're going to have a world price and you're going to have a domestic price as well, but it's going to be the world price that dictates how things are done. We also realize the gains from trade. So we're going to be looking at gains in consumer or producer surplus and as well total surplus in the open economy. Now, domestic price, this exists when we are self-sufficient, okay? When the supply and demand curves are only domestic supply and demand curves. The world price is established by the world supply and the world demand, depending on how things are set up. So other entities can influence the price within a given country. Now, we import goods and services if the world price is lower than the domestic price. If I can get a product from another country cheaper than we can produce it here, we're going to do that. We export services and goods if the world price is higher than the domestic price. If I can sell something at a higher price in Canada than I can in the US, we're going to export it to Canada. So there's good for consumers, there's bad for the consumers. There's good for producers, there's bad for producers. Now, lower price does equal the comparative advantage in the examples that we're looking at. All right, we're going to start our first example with just the domestic market. We've got our downward sloping demand curve, our upward sloping supply curve. We've got price and quantity established at our equilibrium. We've got consumer and producer surplus identified. And then we're going to put the world price in here. So we're going to change from a domestic market to an open economy. When the world price is below the domestic price, which it is in this situation, we import products. So that's how it's going to turn out. But let's go step by step to see where it takes us. All right, now the world price is below the domestic price, but that doesn't mean that all domestic production is going to cease. The supply curve will continue on until it hits that world price. All right, those marginal sellers are going to keep adding on until we get to that world price. And then once we can get it cheaper elsewhere, our domestic production will stop. So this is the domestic quantity supplied right there in that area. Now, these marginal sellers, they leave the market. They're no longer going to be producing because the price is lower than it makes sense for them to produce at. They leave. But we get the rest of the supply that we need from the rest of the world. We're going to import this product into our country. So the world supply is going to be perfectly elastic. We're making an assumption here that we can get as much product as we want to from anywhere else in the world at this specific price. There is so much product available that the price is what it is, and we can't get it for any cheaper. So our domestic supply into our world supply, that gives us our total supply curve for this particular market. Now, we are going to have some losses here. Producer surplus is going to not exist anywhere above the world price anymore. You know, a producer surplus is above the supply curve but below the market price. In this case, market price just dropped, so we just lost that huge chunk of producer surplus. But it gets replaced with consumer surplus. We still have consumers buying this product domestically and now at a lower price because the world market is part of what we're buying and selling from. We also get to add in this extra part of consumer surplus. This lower price from world trade causes consumer surplus to increase. We get additional consumers, and the existing consumers are getting it at a lower price. So we get to add this all on. So our domestic production plus the quantity imported gives us our total quantity supplied in the market. And our demand curve is what it is. It's our domestic demand and our world supply, which is made up of domestic and the rest of the world providing it. So our quantity W right there is our new equilibrium. It is established by our world, it's establishing our world price. So total surplus increases as imports increase the size of the market. Now, we have more consumers buying, we have a larger market here, so we did get a significant area of increase in total surplus. Even though the producers get hit on this one, the consumers gain a lot of extra surplus in this particular market. Now, what are the overall effects of importing? Consumers are better off. We've increased consumer surplus. Producers are going to be worse off in this particular situation. They've lost production, they've lost surplus, marginal sellers have left the market because of the lower price. So from their point of view, this is not a good thing. But from the consumer's point of view, this open economy works well. But total surplus increase, and then our markets increase in size. Now the next example is an export example, but we're going to start once again with the domestic market and then work through it step by step. So in this example, world price is above domestic price. This means to the producers, it'd be a good thing to start shipping the product out to other countries. They're going to get a higher profit, higher surplus out of shipping it to other countries. So when world price is above domestic price, we export. So now once again, we've gone from the closed economy to the open economy by adopting international trade. So our domestic demand is the point up until we get to the world price. Our consumers are not willing to buy any more at that particular price. And the sellers know that they can sell to other people around the world at that specific price. So they opt to sell to everybody else and not drop the price for domestic consumers. So domestic quantity demanded is at that point right there. That blue area represents our domestic quantity demanded. But world demand continues on. We're making an assumption we have a perfectly elastic world demand, meaning there are so many consumers out there that our sellers can sell as much as they want to at that world price that's been established, and they can sell as much as they want to. Marginal buyers, they are leaving the market. That little yellow section right there, those are the people leaving the market because the price is too high. It's above their marginal benefit, so they leave the market. But we got plenty of people around the world willing to buy this. So in this case, producer surplus increases. Producer surplus is found by the area above the supply curve, but below the price. So we have this whole new area that's now producer surplus instead of consumer surplus. But that's not all, because now we also have expanded our markets. The higher price from world trade causes producer surplus to increase. Existing producers have more surplus than they did before, and new producers, our marginal sellers entering the market, they are going to get that extra surplus as well. So our domestic demand plus the world demand equals the total quantity demanded for this market. Our supply curve is dictated by domestic supply, and we're exporting some of our product, but the demand is dictated by world and domestic quantity demanded. All right, our total surplus increases as export increase the size of the market. Our market size is greater. Total surplus is better off. Like I said with the other one, if we're looking at total surplus as a measure of well-being, we are doing better here. But consumers are taking a hit. Producers are much better off in this particular example. Now, the effects of exporting. Producers are better off. Domestic consumers are definitely worse off in this situation. Total surplus is going to increase, and once again, markets increase in size. A few more terms that we did mention in Unit 1, but I'm going to expand on a little bit more, and we're going to throw them into our model coming up. Now, protectionism. This is the idea that the government is going to implement policies that are going to protect usually domestic producers of a product. If we are importing products from around the world and it's hurting domestic production, they may implement protectionist policies and are usually in the form of either a tariff or a quota. So a tariff is a tax imposed usually on an import, can be on an export, but typically most examples deal with imports. And this is going to manipulate the markets, just like a quota does. It's going to limit or regulate the amount of products coming into the country or the value of products coming into the country. And at last slide, I'm going to talk about the difference between these two and the major impact that both of them have. So in this model, we're starting off in an open economy where we are importing from another country because the world price is lower than domestic price. Now, to protect our producers, we're going to implement tariffs or tax on imports to kind of help them out a little bit, and we'll see how this all works. Now, when we add a tariff, what that does is it increases the world price. We want to bring this product into the country. It's going to cost us X amount of dollars per unit brought into the country. So we've got our new price there, the world price plus the tariff. This is what we have to pay to get this product in here. Now, what's going to happen first on this model is the domestic supply curve is going to increase a little bit. We went from the world price up to the world price plus the tariff, so we have a few marginal sellers willing to join the market. Domestic marginal sellers coming back into the market because that price is a little bit higher. So that's good for the sellers. Now, the rest of the world supply is now a little bit higher as well because that tariff is added onto it. So we can get as much from the rest of the world as we want to as long as we're willing to pay that tariff per unit coming into the country. So tariff would increase the world price. Now, the higher prices cause domestic consumers to leave the market. So there's a handful of domestic consumers that are not going to be happy with this higher price. They're going to leave, and it causes consumer surplus to decrease amongst the remaining consumers. But because that higher price is there, the existing producers plus the new producers that join the market are going to receive some producer surplus. So at this point, we've lost some, but not all of the area of surplus that we had before. Now, our quantity imported has shrunk. We've got new quantities down there on the horizontal axis, and this is going to give us our tax revenue. All right, tax revenue is received by the government. We calculate this by taking the number of products imported, the quantity imported, and multiplying that by the size of the tariff, the distance between. So we're calculating the area of this particular rectangle right here, both those areas of TR right there. That's our tax revenue. That is part of total surplus. So we would kind of calculate that in. Now you're going to notice as of right now, almost everything we had before the tariff is accounted for. It's either in the form of consumer surplus, producer surplus, or now tax revenue, which is going towards the government, so it's still considered part of total surplus. Now there's two little triangles that are unaccounted for at this point, and this is our deadweight loss. This is the cost of implementing the tariff. The tariff will help out the producers, but we've lost surplus in the market. Consumers definitely lost in this situation. Producers gained a little bit, but total surplus is down by the area in those gray deadweight loss triangles. So what are the effects of a tariff? Producers are protected, better off. Consumers are worse off than they were with trade, at least. They're still better off than they were without trade at all. Total surplus is going to decrease, and the market size is going to decrease, resulting in that deadweight loss that we have. All right, so quotas do show up on the exam, but you do not have to illustrate the model. They do not require that. I do have the model down below just to kind of show you how similar tariffs and quotas are, but there's one key difference between them. So both tariffs and quotas protect domestic producers by limiting the imports. In both of these models, we have the exact same outcome. The market has been limited by a certain amount. We have gained back a little bit of producer surplus for the producers because of the quota implemented or the tariff. The big difference between these two is that with a tariff, we get tax revenues. With a quota, we still limit how much is coming in. Domestic producers are protected, but the government doesn't get any tax revenue. So there is actually a little bit more deadweight loss with the quota than there is with the tariff, but the protectionist policy on the producers is identical if they kind of tweak it the way that it needs to be. So the key difference between a tariff and a quota is the lack of tax revenue on a quota. All right, hopefully that was quick enough and to the point and you understood all of that. If not, make sure you're taking a look at the practice video on consumer producer surplus with world trade, and as well also check out the review video for Unit 2. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.